Lincolnshire Day. It's a very appropriate meeting on a historic day for our county. So I'll start with item 1 then. Apologies, please. All right. Somebody has to apologise. Councillor Boyd-Troy apologise. Anybody else has a question? Okay, any declaration of interest, please? None indicated, so I'll move on to item 3. Any announcements by leader, executive or executive directors? Well, just to say that in terms back to the Lincolnshire Day theme, see now the Mayor Combined Authority proposal has been accepted by government. Obviously, things are now in train to set up the procedures to have the first meeting of the Combined Authority in February. And at the moment, we're working up some of the technicalities, but probably most importantly, also one of the tasks of the Combined Authority before May is to come up with an investment plan, so how the thoughts about how the extra money that we're about to receive in various forms, we'll have a plan as to how that will improve the situation in Lincolnshire.
No one got anything to that.
Okay, on that, and also I think as Councillor Davey announced last month, obviously there are a lot of issues about and publicity about the proposed pylons going across our county and others. So we have had meetings with councils in East Anglia, county councils in East Anglia, and we are working together to see what we can do to at least get some common sense to the proceedings. Because at the moment, we don't believe that the full facts have come out, and indeed the full cost of onshore pylons have been properly assessed. So we will be writing to National Grid later this week to formally ask them to reduce their figures, which backs up their claim that putting the pylons up, 140 pylons up across Lincolnshire is somehow cheaper than laying a cable on the seabed. So I think we would really like to see the details of that. So those are my 2 announcements. Any further announcements? Councillor Woolley?
Thank you, Leader. I'm delighted to say that yesterday I conducted the official opening of the new coroner's facility for Greater Lincolnshire at Mile Cross. This will mean that we've got not just more use of space, but it means that we've actually got 2 courts that can run, and it's a thermal upgrade to the premises as well.
Thank you. That's Corey.
Thank you, Leader. Yeah, if you're not already aware, you haven't already thought about which event you want to go to, we're happy to announce that we have entered into a further 1-year deal with a supplier to put on live music events at the castle. The first 2 concerts were announced yesterday. More will be announced. I think we've got 9 in total this year. And so hopefully we'll have another run of sellout concerts as we did this year.
Thank you. Any further? Okay, thank you very much. I'll move on to item 4, which minutes of the meeting held on this committee on the 3rd of September. As you all wish, I sign these to throw that record. Agreed? Thank you. So we move on to the substantive item today, which is the Building Communities of Specialist Provision Phase 2.
Thank you. Yes, so you've got the report and it outlines recommendations for Lincolnshire's Building Communities of Specialist Provision Strategy. I'm sure we could get a much shorter title. Obviously, the aim is to enhance education for children with additional needs, meet the growing demand for specialist education, as I'm sure colleagues around the table will have heard us talk about before. This will reduce the reliance on costly independent providers and address the rise in permanent exclusion. The focus is on capital investment, and we're planning to build a new social, emotional, mental health school, but this building will be fully funded by the DFE. Our officers have been very good at getting some more funding from DFE, so that's great news. And then what will also happen is that special schools will be expanded to actually take in these additional young people who need that specialist education. And there'll also be some new SEND and alternative provision groups as well. So the total funding, as I've just said, is 13 million, which was already allocated in our capital programme. And the remainder of the for the new school, which is 41,008,000, as I said, is going to be funded by DFE. So there should be no extra funding that we're coming to council for. We should be able to manage within those the remit there. The proposal will create over 500 additional places across various educational settings across the county as well, which will also mean that obviously, hopefully, children will be going to their local school and not one a lot further away. So that's the report, Tracy of the report, Mr. Chair.
Okay.
Nothing to add, no. We can talk through the report, but you can.
Yeah, I mean, I think just a bit more detail, the proposed where the provision will be enhanced, because some, if you'd like to just run through it for us.
Yeah, absolutely. So thank you, Leader. So as Councillor Bradwell has given you an overview of the project so far, I think probably it's worth picking up initially on the fact that this is phase 2. We've already significantly invested over £101 million into our special schools to enhance the state and increase by 527 places. So I suppose the question would be, will we have already done that while we're embarking on phase 2? I think it's worth noting that the implementation of the capital programme currently coincided with a period of extensive growth within the sector. We projected between 2 to 3% expansion, and SEND demand has significantly increased now to a place where local authorities are seeing increases between 12 and 20% year on year for demand for special school places. So the increase, it has been significant. We've managed it much better than other local authorities in Lincolnshire, and have projected the demand and have been able to respond accordingly. But now we're starting to see those real increases.
Can I just stop you there? Can you just explain what's going on? So we're not unique in this.
We're not. No.
So can
No.
you just explain what's going on?
Absolutely.
This big increase in demand in this special educational.
Yeah. So in 2014, there were reforms to the SEND system, and that changed really the powers that local authority had around whether children were eligible for an EHCP or not. It put co-production at the heart of that, which is really important, so that children and families were involved in that. But unfortunately, it led to a surge in demand because there's no threshold. So in social care, we control the eligibility about whether or not you get a social worker. In SEND, we don't. You know, if somebody feels their child should be assessed, then we have to embark on a 20-week assessment of their child. And more often than not, where we do say no, often we're challenged on that and we go to tribunal. Within the tribunal system, I think it's 95% are lost by local authorities and won by parents. I don't think there's any other sector where one part of the tribunal loses so consistently, which means obviously we don't tend to go to tribunal with the legal costs associated with it, unless we really feel we've got a firm case. And even then, sometimes the finding is not in our favour. So that also drives the provisional. Tribunals find against us, and that can mean that we have children moving into specialist provision or being allocated an EHCP who don't need one. We've also seen, a real-time reduction in school budgets. So their ability to manage children in mainstream, where they might have had teaching assistants in the past and they might have had provision to be able to support children within the mainstream. Schools are telling us they're really struggling to do that because they don't have that kind of provision available as easily. So they're pushing through more EHCPs as well. There has been a really good report published, which I think we've talked about before here, called the ISOS report in SEND. Now, that report talks about the fact that we have got a situation now where nationally we've seen an exponential increase in the number of children with an EHCP, a huge increase in the number of those children who are in specialist provision, not mainstream. And that actually we've not seen an improvement in outcomes for those children. So it's not like the additional money and the additional specialism is improving outcomes for those children. So we're working hard through LGA, CCM and ADCS to push the government to rethink the SEND system and to rethink it. You'll also remember we saw an expansion of from 18 to 25. So EHCPs used to be 5 to 18. Now they're 0 to 25. We didn't get any funding for that. We didn't get an increase in funding. So all of those additional EHCPs outside of that original age range are a pressure to us, and again resulting in us needing to have specialist provision. So what we did in Lincolnshire when we saw that come in, and you made the decision to invest in expanding our special school estate, we've done that. What we want to do through this paper is to say, let's not just increase really specialist provision, let's work with mainstreams, let's develop SEND hubs within mainstreams where children can move back into mainstream quickly. They've not transferred to a specialist provision, they can get support for a period of time and then they can move in. And also we want the opportunity to bring back some children that we've got in our expensive out of county into Lincolnshire. So we've got a special school expansion which will allow us to do that, all the while considering the impact on transport, because we know that SEND has a significant impact on the transport bill. So we want to distribute these across the authority so that children can be allocated to their nearest specialist provision. And we're working with Andy and Nicole in place to think about how is it we can better plan specialist allocation? How can we do that so that the consideration of transport is up there with the consideration of the child's needs? The problem is the tribunal doesn't feel, because it sees each cost individually for transport, it doesn't see it as significant, whereas we know the cumulative effect is very significant in a county like Lincolnshire.
Thank you. You want to just run through what exactly is planned?
That we're proposing. So firstly is the new social emotional mental health school, which we're proposing would be based in Sleaford. That would be for an additional 154 places for 5 to 16. And obviously, as Councillor Bradwell's referenced, that's part of the Wave 4 DFE. So the DFE would be responsible for the construction costs, and the local authority would be responsible for any abnormals on sites or any change to design scope. The next proposal within the paper is an 8 classroom expansion to the Grantham Special School to the Grantham Additional Needs Fellowship, the Ambergate site. That would provide us with an additional 96 places. We know that NKSK is regularly one of our higher areas for EHC needs assessment and for EHC places and for demand for special school, and also in terms of growth for the area. We would be looking at providing up to 20 mainstream SEND hubs, which would provide us with 20 additional places in our mainstream settings. And there are many benefits to our mainstream settings to both ensure that children remain in mainstream, so therefore their outcomes are improved, but also it has a cumulative effect on the mainstream setting by upskilling the workforce because you have skilled specialist teachers within that setting. And within that, we would also be looking at 3 alternative provision places, a minimum of 3 commissioned by the local authority places. They would be spread across the county so that we've got good geographical spread. And we've had very good interest so far. We've been out for expression of interest to a number of primary and secondary who all have spaces. So we wouldn't need to be building. We would just be doing some minor remodelling in the classroom for those ones. And then there are some further minor works to 2 special schools who have, one who's had worked onto it already and one that hasn't as part of phase 1. Our special schools are now starting to embed, and they're saying, actually, we don't use this room or we don't use this room, and we convert those back to classrooms. So there will be a period of investment into those schools just for minor remodelling. So an example of one would be at Aga, where we're looking at moving a DT room into a classroom, creating an additional 8 to 10 places. So that would be the proposal.
And really, if I can just say, that's about really sweating the asset we built. So we built those assets and they're built to regulation, lots of different spaces. In reality, those school leaders are finding some of those spaces are really underutilised, and because we're working closely with them, we're being able to sweat what we've already put in to make sure that we maximise the places available.
Okay. Anything further? Scrutiny comments. I presume that's why you're here.
It is, Lady, yes. Heather's actually touched on one which was around the outcomes or the lack of difference in outcomes for those who are in SEND provision compared to mainstream school. The main conversation was around the rising project costs for phase 2 of the build that was discussed in committee, because phase 1 was originally projected to be 50 million, and as has been said, it's over 101 million. So there was quite a brisk debate about that. Just to go back, we were indulged for a bit of slight history. And I don't know if Lincolnshire ever did this, but when I was a young Wiltshire, a long time ago, in Wiltshire in the 1990s, we had and it's a slightly different system because it went to some had year 4 and then you moved somewhere all the way through. But they had hubs then. So whether I don't know if we ever did in Lincolnshire at the time, or if this is an entirely new sort of process for Lincolnshire, but I know some areas in the 90s used to have a similar sort of system. So it's interesting in that sense that are we going back to something we used to use previously? The final area, again, has been touched on, is around the difference in requests for PHCPs and why Sleaford and North Hykeham, South West Stephen, has been so high compared to the rest of the county. And I know members have asked for a breakdown by division in terms of requests for HCPs, and also if there's any other factors, economic factors, social factors around that request, because at the minute, as members, we have anecdotal evidence when we talk to people, but it's very difficult to know exactly what's driving it. I mean, other than wanting the legal protection it brings, which is obviously significant, but obviously there is a cost implication to us as a council, which is why obviously we're trying to reduce that number. And as Heather said, tribunal system is, shall we say, not particularly friendly to the local authority calls, so it makes it all the more sort of imperative. But I think long-term leader, as has been said, this is going to require national reform, because for many, many, many years they've stuck a band-aid over a very large hole. And unless central government change something, and it's very much the same with SEN transport, we're going to be tinkering around the edge when really we need a structural reform.
Yeah, I think it's on one of the many to-do lists in the new government, because the last government basically parked it effectively, and something does need to change. You want to just answer those 2 points? What the sort of what we did in the past in terms of how the reason for 100 million spent, and then also, is it all of North and South Kesterton, or is there a particular area?
So if I start with what we've done in the past. So Lincolnshire's had a really long tradition of having very effective special schools. So we didn't have a capacity issue in the same way as other people had. So we were able to move children into specialist provision when they needed it. And before the 2014 reforms, we had a lot more control over who we felt needed it and how that would move in. So we didn't do the SEND hubs in the way that others did in the 80s. We did do behaviour hubs. We did work on those. So some of this alternative provision, we have got lessons learned around that, about how we make sure that they run successfully, and how we make sure we really got clear agreements in place with the schools that are going to be doing them. But this is a brand new initiative for us, and the DFE.
Of course, in the 90s, there weren't academies. No, the local authority had more overall control, actually, so they could obviously.
And the DFE are interested, talking to Martin regularly about these hubs developments, to look at our scope, to look at what we're doing, to look at how it, in a very cost-effective way, delivers that provision. So we're continuing to work with the DFE, and I think it's fair to say we're a bit of a trailblazer in terms of the work that we're developing and the scope that we're putting around it. In terms of the rising costs of the last project, I think it happened during the huge impact we saw to the Ukrainian war and COVID and materials. So if you remember, this ran from 2017 to 2022. So it hit all of the COVID in the end, and it hit all of the construction rise that we saw. We did, however, get more money in through SEND Basic Need, and we got more money in through General Basic Need, which we were able to allocate. So we did get grants. There was a recognition nationally. So whilst the cost rose, we did also get some grant rise as well, which we were able to offset that. So we've worked with property colleagues to make sure that we've got, and as we do each one, we'll know how much contingency, and normally each of these individual schemes will go through Children and Young People Scrutiny Committee and then on to Councillor Bradwell if we agree the strategy here, and that's how it would progress. So we'll have scrutiny on those construction costs, but we work closely with property around that.
Also, I know that we do meet regularly, don't we?
We are
projects like this up and running. We're meeting that. Well, we did meet every month. Then it went to
we've got a governance board which Councillor Bradwell chairs and oversees it, and there's financial reporting monthly on that, and property and finance and children's services are represented on there. In terms of the North Kesteven, South Kesteven demand, I think firstly it is one of our bigger areas in terms of population. So Secondly, it's one of the areas we didn't do as much development in the expansion. So actually the demand for specialist places is there. There is also, you know, an active group of parents who, you know, are quite able to make those applications and put those through. And so that does also drive up demand as well. And then we do have areas of significant deprivation there, and significant deprivation does tend to translate into increased need. And so
I didn't think there was a correlation between deprivation and that. I thought it was actually reverse proportion. But basically, better off parents probably are better able to access the system, shall I put it like that?
I think that's true. I think the need can sometimes be there for children who you know, sometimes their parents have got additional needs as well, and we see additional needs in the children. So I think there's a link, isn't there, between what you're articulating around children who their parents who are able to navigate that system really confidently and get what the children are entitled to, and then parents who aren't, but whose children do have a need, and schools tend to step into that space.
Thank you. Right. Questions, comments? Councillor Davies.
Thank you. It's a really interesting report. It's a great piece of work. I've seen in Grantham firsthand the work that's been done within the sector. A couple of questions. Page 21, it seems to be saying that if we send a child out of county, it's about £70,000 a year, which is a staggering amount of money. I can't quite work out what the comparison figure is for in county. It seems about £10,000-12,000. Is it around that?
Yes, it's quite a complex system in terms of our funding formula. But effectively, if you IMS place would be around 70,000, a local authority place will be around 20,000 and slightly less. But there is a government contribution for the first 6,000 on that. So to the local authority, it'd be around between 10 and 40.
Yeah, so there's quite a saving, isn't it? I suppose I think it's great we're putting the local provision. What kind of service level agreement do we get in place? Harking back to Heather's point that schools all of a sudden have pulled back. What I wouldn't want to be doing is investing all this capital money into building facilities in schools for them to say, oh, we can't do it now because we haven't got teachers, we haven't got this. How do we monitor and maintain that?
Yeah. And that's the learning from the behaviour units as well. So that's being developed through the scope, and it's about having a really clear and enforceable legal agreement in place about how long the units will need to run.
Yeah.
And then I think beyond that, it's about really working in partnership with schools, because there is a risk to schools, because Ofsted will inspect these units when they inspect the school, and these children will be on the school's register. They'll be dual registered in some cases, so there are risks in schools. So this is a partnership. Without a doubt, we need to all make this work. And I think there is a real desire from schools to support with this. So we've gone with the willing, we haven't gone with the investment they're getting in terms of per unit on capital isn't, and not any single one of them will be significant, if that makes sense. It's about remodeling, maybe moving a wall, widening a door for a wheelchair. But this is not like that first phase, which was significant investment. We want all of these places. We will also have very clear rules around how many places, how we decide who gets those places, and how we work with schools once we have those children in, because some of these children will be challenging, and they'll be coming from schools where they might be saying, the school might be saying, I think my child needs specialist provision, and we're saying, actually, we can go to a school with enhanced provision and make it work there. So I think it's definitely partnership working, but with that legal underlying, and then of course we'll be funding the places. And if schools don't provide the places, we won't fund the places.
So that's our main stop, isn't it? Don't play by our rules to a certain extent.
Absolutely.
We could theoretically, it's not something like huge amounts, we could move that provision to other schools.
Absolutely, yeah. And if we had a child who we felt could thrive in mainstream, but was going to be complex for a period of time, we can be flexible and say, we'll place with you, and we do this in social care sometimes. So we might say that'll take up 2 places because it's going to take double staffing for a little while, but we'll review it in 6 weeks. Whereas when we place in an independent, they say this is the price, and then that it's really difficult to get it down. Whereas we'll have that flexibility to negotiate locally with head teachers we know.
Real benefits in mainstream schools as well, because we're offering a Bedford workforce development package, so they will receive a workforce development training package that meets the needs. So if they're very poor on autism or then we'll be able to support the whole school in terms of the
Okay.
workforce
So
development.
there's some professional development.
Yeah, absolutely. And then in terms of sustainability, obviously we're targeting schools that have got safe classrooms, so we don't have to do significant work. For some of those, they are our smaller rural schools who may potentially not be sustainable, so having the same units supports their sustainability.
Councillor Willie?
Thank you. A couple of questions, but all around the same thing. You mentioned South Kesteven and North Kesteven, and the demand seems to be growing there. With South Kesteven, am I jumping to a conclusion? The one thing I've noticed within South Kesteven District Council is they seem to be getting a steady flow of planning applications from private children's care homes. So my question would be, where do those children get educated? And if it is within our establishments, do they make a payment for that? And is there a correlation between the number of care homes coming into the area and the number of the rise in numbers? And I suppose on top of that is, if the answer is yes, do conversations take place with any of the district councils, but in this instance, with
So-
that particular?
So you've stumbled on a very thorny issue. So I don't think the correlation's massive, and I don't think that that's where the biggest pressure is coming. But what you've stumbled on is a tension between two regulations with the DFE. So we have the belongings regulation, and we have the other regulation,
Local authority recruitment.
interlocal authority recruitment regulation. So the belongings regulation, which is where it always was, is if they're a child in care, they're our child. So if we place them in Nottingham and they need a special school provision, we maintain that EHCP in that placement, and vice versa. Then when the government started to do intervention in other authorities around send high needs block overspending, they said, no, you should be recouping that money so that so that basically some authorities claim that money back and don't pay you to have theirs, and others do it differently. So what we've come to a tension where there's two different regulations that don't meet. So there's been national discussions about that. In the East Midlands, we've agreed it's belongings, so that if we place, that our children, we pay, and if you place in Lincolnshire and they need specialist provision, you pay. So we've got that agreement across the whole of the East Midlands. So it is a really complex piece. We've had legal advice on it. We've looked at it around the East Midlands. So if they're placing in Lincolnshire and they're in the East Midlands, we will be getting the funding for them. If they're outside, lots of local authorities are still doing belongings, so we will be getting funding for them. But it is an area we continue to push. I don't think the funding or the numbers are a significant factor in what we're seeing. Most of the children we're talking about are Lincolnshire children, not children in care. And there are other issues with the development of private children's homes, which I won't digress into.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'll find that. Obviously, there's a lot of pressure from London councils, who obviously the accommodation costs are a lot cheaper places like Lincolnshire. So how does it work with the London boroughs, for example?
Yeah, so most of them do the belongings regs, but it will be on a case-by-case basis. So we have to work on a case-by-case basis, and it's the same for transport. So we work on a case-by-case basis for transport. But generally, we're a net importer. So we have more children with SEND in Lincolnshire than we place children with SEND out of Lincolnshire. So there is a small element of pressure around that, but then that pressure is removed if they do the belongings.
I mean, when obviously you spent 100 million replacing and improving all the special schools. One of the reasons behind that was to make them more generic, otherwise all, and so not having children going from one end of the county borough to what was perceived to be the specialist school. How is that?
Yes.
How's that actually worked out in reality?
So I think there's been, so in reality, what we said politically was we wouldn't force anybody to move.
Yeah, I mean, I
So
understand.
it's a growing strategy. I think the reality is that there is a significant pressure around places. And so I think when a place comes up, we do try to place as locally as we can. But sometimes we might have a child in a really costly INMS, and bringing that child back might be cheaper than placing a local child. What we're working on is we're working with transport around how we do send place planning more with more sophistication. So if we think about in our general school place planning, which is a matrix of decision making about which schools we expand when, we have somebody whose role it is in a team who work on where do we need to expand. In SEND, we've never had that pressure in the same way. We've had the transport pressure, but not the placements pressure. So we're working as part of the SEND, as part of the transport transformation board to say, how do we accelerate our sophistication around the SEND place planning? So it is working in terms of it's growing. That system will grow in, but we need to accelerate some of that. And when we get a space, we need to stop and say, there's lots of things to consider. So distance is one of them, need is another, the current situation. So if they're at home on home tuition and, there's pressure in the family home because mum needs to work. So we need to work out that matrix of how we decide who gets that seat in a way that takes into account the transport costs, but also takes into account the needs of the children, always edging closer and closer to local. So these units will be local because that will be about transport and within that local area. We want that, to make sure that stays as a local initiative.
Yeah, I understand that. I understand there is a tail, which will a long tail eventually. But I mean, I'm really still getting on that some parents, because I think we've all had them say, well, I don't want my child to go to X school because Y school, often the independent school says, well, they've got this. They're excellent at doing just right for my child. So I just wonder, is there in volume terms, is there much where we have to concede and say, okay, they can either go the next street is out of the county, but or then I want to go 20 miles away. So we wouldn't go to tribunal on that, because if it's a 20-mile difference, the tribunal would find against us straight away. What I would say is we're less in that space at the minute because there are so few spaces. So when a parent wants a specialist provision, that luxury of I want that one, or that one isn't there at the minute, because actually we can probably only find one place and parents have probably waited a while. So we're not in that kind of same space at the minute. But you're right, if that was the case, in the current tribunal system, if we went and said we want this school, and the parents want another school which is 20 miles further, we wouldn't pay the legal cost to take that. We know we'd lose without a shadow of a doubt. And that is something we keep raising nationally. What are the sort of average legal costs do we know?
Yes, we do. Average legal costs for a tribunal.
Yeah, no, I don't want to hear this, right? Yeah.
So depending on which routes within the high needs system, you've got a number of different avenues. You can go to mediation, and a mediation session costs £800 per session. That's an informal resolution. If it goes through to tribunal, usually anything from around £6,000 to £17,000 in costs to do it. And just on that point on tribunals, the differentiating factor in tribunal context really is material cost, and material cost is anything above 20,000. So if the transport, for example, costs 12,000, it's not a material cost in tribunal decision making. So
parents, I mean, like, do they fund their own, or do they get legal aid, or window fee?
It'll depend on their circumstances.
So they can.
Yeah, and
There's
some
all
of
those
them
routes
instruct.
available.
Some of them instruct barristers.
Yeah. In terms of fine, obviously we are just about holding the line. Can you just give a description of cost pressure, but also it's a bad situation, but compared to others, we are pretty good. So can you just how the pressure is developing for us, but also a description of what's happening elsewhere.
So the paper sets out, this is designed to try and eat into some of that future trajectory plan, and the team do really well in terms of working out what's coming down the line. We are just on that precipice at the moment of potentially going into deficit in the high needs budget. So we're not unique, but have been in that very rare of small handful of councils who haven't been in that position. I think it's two of us, isn't it? I think predominantly nationally. Now, recent forecasts have shown that nationally, the high needs block deficits in the region of about £2 billion. I think that's scheduled to rise to about £6 billion over the next 2 or 3 years. Now, that money is all off balance sheet funding at the moment, basically. So the government's put in place something called the statutory override, which means councils can take it off their balance sheets and their financial reporting. The implication of that is, with the growing deficit, is bring that back on when that override finishes. A lot of councils will be deemed to be insolvent because
Yeah, I mean, there's some,
Yeah.
there was 100
Yeah.
million which
Yeah.
we didn't get
That's
share
right.
of. Some councils have,
that's
they're
correct.
not quite, they're actually giving their opinion alone effectively, which I'm not sure that.
Yeah, well, so some schools are in something called the safety valve
Safety valve.
process, which is that some councils like Surrey, for example, I think have been part of that process, but not all councils are. And they've been using this, let's say, this statutory override to take the costs off balance sheets. To say that's been scheduled to run, I think they've extended it for, in the process of extending it for a further year to 26, 27. But again, there needs to be plans after that, and that's the big pressure that needs to be put back to the new government around how they're going to deal with that, because the costs aren't coming down, they're only going up, and that problem's going to get worse. That's why the calls are for that widespread system change, essentially, isn't it?
And sometimes what happens is they'll come to us because they'll see us as if we've got the magic answer. And I'm really clear, it's a when, not an if for us. We cannot, we're doing everything we can to mitigate it, but we will overspend on the high needs block. And what we need is some changes or additional funding. And as I say, the report that's been done by CCN says additional funding isn't getting these young people better results. Therefore,
Otherwise, so
absolutely.
just this once you put the cost off balance.
Yes.
And then what? It's still the cost.
It's still a cost, yeah. So how councils are essentially funding that through their treasury management processes, basically. So if
I'm not guessing we do.
no, absolutely not. No. But if we ended up in deficit at some point in future, that's the process that we'd have to follow as well. It's any way you can continue to fund
But then
your expenditure.
What happens? Well, the cost is still sitting there off balance sheet, but it's still
Yeah,
attributable to the particular account.
it is. Yeah. So in presenting your accounts, try not to get too complicated with it. The way that we present our accounts to the local population is we try and present, the standard profit and loss style account, the balance sheet, for example, and then we have something called the movement and reserve statement, and that reverses out all of the charges that aren't attributable to the local taxpayer, and that's the method that the government are using this statutory override at the moment to not show it as a charge to the local taxpayer. If that didn't exist, it would do, and that means then that councils would either have to fund these charges either via reserves or via a council tax charge, basically.
So it'll be a future cost.
Yeah. Which is why I say if that statutory override isn't in place, that's what would lead to all councils having to deliver those Section 114
Unless the government, which would be very unfair of those.
Yeah.
Didn't.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well,
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So, yes.
Can I say, that's almost like you're trading money in something.
That's the challenge that local authority treasurers have put back around this is it's place.
Just ignore this massive liability and cost, pretend it's not there, and the numbers sort of. I'm trying that all in my next round.
This is the professional challenge that it presents. It's not just a children's services challenge. It's a whole local government system challenge. And the fact is that we, as treasurers, we're being asked to sign off, as you say, the going concern of our individual councils, when in theory it's not technically true. And the only thing that's stopping that is a government decision around bumping on the statutory override on an annual basis.
I think the other thing to add is, so as you know, we're a sector-led improvement partner for social care, so we go and do work with other local authorities, and we have a regional improvement and innovation alliance which the Department for Education funds. What's happened is they're wanting to put SEND into that. So they approached us to ask us to be at the equivalent of a sector-led improvement partner for SEND. And I discussed it with Councillor Bradwell and Debbie and said, basically, the solutions, this is not, the council can't solve it. Yeah. Council can't solve this, and me going into another council isn't going to solve it for them. So I think there is. We didn't push that. No, we didn't fancy that.
So the other side of the coin is central transport. So just want to talk about that and what, because that is, again, that's alongside that. I mean, that's massively increasing, mostly because of central transport.
Yeah, so as Heather's sort of intimated, as part of the transformation programme, we're recognising that there needs to be a greater alignment between the two teams in terms of actually all of that route planning, understanding at the beginning of people's school, the life experience, in those conversations. The route optimization work, which has obviously been looked at in outside of the specific issues with SEND, is already identifying savings. So by actually being smarter about actually understanding where people live, what their needs are, where they go to school, we're already identifying that. Greater refinement in terms of actually looking at it in the context of the SEND agenda as well. We'd expect those savings to be to continue to increase, not least because obviously the specific requirements in terms of those people who've got special educational needs adds particular costs in terms of the specialisms that are required, the PA support, particular vehicle requirements, etc. So that's already identifying savings within a year. We expect that to actually follow through. And we're exploring with Martin the sort of team that needs to be in place to actually integrate those activities. And we're hoping we'll be able to bring back a proposition of identifying how that can be embedded into our day-to-day activities.
But obviously the cost, I mean, I just described the cost increases that were.
So the cost increases, as you're aware, Leader, consequence of the previous problems with inflationary pressures, rises in people cost of living aspects in terms of wage matters, etc., and the issue around how we manage the contract arrangements with the providers. So we're doing more work with our procurement colleagues to actually look at how we stimulate the market, give greater access to a more sort of defined marketplace, and therefore hopefully that will again reduce costs down.
Yeah, just give us
the current forecast overspend for this year is in the region of
overspend total.
Total spend is now over 50 million pounds a year.
And what was it? 2014.
2014, I think it was 27, 28 million.
Effectively doubled.
In the last.
Obviously, there have been inflation
Yes.
cost piece and that issue, but a lot of that is a substantial portion of that will be due to the standard. Yeah, well, that's the doubling.
Yeah.
So that's what we look at. Everybody else, all the other rural authorities are in.
And as you're aware, last year there were two pieces of work, one by CCN, one by ADEC, actually looking at this and recognising again that it was system failure in the same way that the lobbying is taking place in DFE is taking place in terms of actually saying that it's a root and branch review is needed of actually how the school transport sector.
Yeah, I agree. So I think it's something the new government, to be fair, the previous government didn't address, and obviously it's something that I think you will have to.
Leader, can I ask a quick question on that? So,
Yeah, you can.
thank you. I know some authorities, because of the, shall I say, issue in market, they insource their transport. They got their own vehicles, their own. Have we ever looked at that?
We do it.
Okay, I wasn't aware of
I
that.
want to describe.
So yeah, through the technical company we set up, that was set up, and we have intervened in some contracts where it's considered to be appropriate. The ability to do that across the piece is, we believe, would ultimately cost us more. There is more detailed work going on to look into that. It's been considered to be a measure of last resort rather than a preferred option. And it then raises a range of issues in terms of our capacity and expertise to operate at that scale as a bus.
I think the problem in rural areas is, in urban areas, you've got lots of bus companies and lots of competition. In rural areas, because the miles are long and the population is relatively small, you end up, as you know, with typically one bus company per area, which is a problem. Yes, Colin.
Yeah, thanks. I've listened to the debate. I have a couple of thoughts or observations from me. I think we're quite obviously at the point where we're nearly unsustainable in terms of this whole process. We've got increasing demand, 20% this year. So just hearing some of these numbers, it's not going to be long, I would suggest, 2-3 years before this is going to put a total pressure on the authority. So maybe I think, apart from lobbying the government, through your leadership role in the region, I think that this should be really a matter that is taken up the government as a matter of urgency. And through the CCM, as you know, makes
Well, it's just the number one.
makes
To be honest, I mean, I have obviously their priority, which I think is the right decision. On that to them, that they're prioritising this over fair funding, because it will. Some councils will be effectively bankrupt because we are fortunate at the bank because we've managed finances pretty tightly, that we have got some headroom, but there are some who are in big trouble financially because of this.
So Helen, the provision in the papers today obviously covers us for a period of time. How long is that period of time, you think, before we will need to relook again at further provision if the demand continues to rise?
So what I would say is, I think we already have a reliance on the independent market.
Yeah.
So we want to reduce that reliance. I think this will be something we need to continue to review, but we do now have a send capital allocation on a yearly basis from central government. So we were ahead of the game when we did the special building specialist communities provision. I got that wrong, but we went ahead then and we did that, and now the government is investing in the capital side of it. So I think what you'll see is we will be thinking consistently about what we want to spend, just like we do for our normal place plan, for our mainstream place planning. We'll be doing that. And just to assure you on your point around profile and things. So nationally, I chair the education board for the ABCS, and as the leader says, it's our number one priority. And Debbie leads the children's on the chief execs, and it's their number one. So I do think consistently now the message is everybody's worried about this.
Yeah, the financial rule is at the goal.
I think we'll be doing
Okay,
it.
right. Unless anybody else has got any further contributions. Recommendations there on page 17. So we approve the phase 2 of the provision and we delegate the details to the executive director in consultation with the authority. Those in favour, please show. Thank you. That is agreed. Did you vote, Councillor Murphy?
I did.
All right. Oh, I didn't see that. Right. Okay, thank you. So that's agreed. Thank you for that. And with that, that concludes the meeting. Thank you for your attendance. Have a hopefully a drier afternoon. If you're out there